Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I'm going to play a familiar piece of music for you in just a moment, and I don't want you to recognize necessarily the name of the show or the composer of the song, but being a cartoon, and you'll figure that out, the question is, who created the cartoon and designed the drawings?
Well, there's a song we can all sing along with, the Flintstones, with the wonderful voices of Alan Reed Sr. and Jane Vanderpyle, B. Benaderet, and of course as Barney, whether you know it or not, the great Mel Blanc. When you're with the Flintstones, and one of the people most responsible for bringing the Flintstones to TV and movie screens is Joseph Barbera of Hanna-Barbera. Mr. Barbera joins us from the soundstage of his studios in Hollywood. Mr. Barbera, thank you for joining us. Before we talk about the history of cartoons, there is one thing I want to get into, and that's a very important matter. The fact that a lot of artwork from cartoons is now being sold at auction, including a lot of what are called cells, which are the transparent drawings used for those cartoons. Some of the work of the Flintstones, for example, is coming up on sale. Why is there this resurgence in interest in cartoons as an art form?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, or the way I read it is that, and I get this because I do quite a lot of traveling and autographing these particular cells in various cities. But what has come to pass is that there are a lot of people, let me say young couples and middle-aged couples, and they have their children, and when they see our characters, it's this kind of a nostalgic event that happens. They say, oh my, they say, I was raised with Fred, and I was raised with George Jetson. My favorite is Scooby-Doo. And we have one person that said, I love the Great Gazoo.
I am the Great Gazoo, and I thank you for rescuing me. Hey, Fred, do you see what I see? I see it, but I don't believe it.
What they're getting is a kind of a warm feeling of nostalgia, plus the fact that they're suddenly beginning to realize that the animation art is an item that will enhance in value and increase in value because of this great interest that's developing.
I know for a very, very long time, animation, I would think in the art world, was simply looked upon as something cute or maybe even child's play, but now...
Yeah, kid drawings.
It is.
And not only that, but only kids watched it. Well, we're now learning the truth. All people watch them, including families. And one of the sad things about the whole project is that we threw away so much of this wonderful artwork.
Almost all cartoon work, although ostensibly done for children, was done in kind of a sneaky way by adults for adults.
Well, that's good. I mean, actually, for instance, now when we did the Tom and Jerry's, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
That was never made for children because they didn't have such a thing as Saturday morning cartoons. So when we made a cartoon, a Tom and Jerry cartoon, we would go out and preview it just like you do a feature. We'd go out at nighttime to a theater and sneak one of them in and get a reaction. And there weren't any kid audiences, but we never lost a child because of the technique we use and the humor that we use. So they were never meant for children.
I think it's difficult for a lot of young people today to understand that the cartoon, quote, cartoon shows they see were first aired in prime time. They were part of our evening weekday prime time program.
And every cartoon that we made for prime time, not for prime time, for motion pictures, in theaters around the world is still playing today. That's what's such an incredible situation.
Mr. Barbera, let's talk about the auction that's coming up at Christie's East.
At Christie's.
What kinds of articles are you going to have there? And could you again treat what you said before, and that's how sad it is, so much was just capriciously thrown away?
It sure was. I'm still looking for my original Tom and Jerry storyboards, because I did every one of them, 127 of them, and so far I've only been able to retrieve one Xerox copy. But for instance, what we're doing is we have a complete set of animation art from one of the Flintstone episodes called The Great Gazoo, And that's comprised of 54, if you can believe this, mounted storyboard drawings, original recording script, one specially created cell signed by Bill and I, and production notes, all in a crinkled pigskin case. Now, that's only one item. You get the whole storyboard. We also have a Yogi Bear set done exactly the same way, the whole storyboard with a color sample. Then we have individual cells. We have, for instance, one from the Jetsons Meet the Flintstones, which was a feature we did for television and was very popular. And we have some beautiful artwork coming from the Jetson feature that we did. And then, if I may give you one more item here, we have artwork from the Greatest Adventure, Stories from the Bible, which we did, which has been a huge success. So there's quite an interesting variety, believe me.
Mr. Barbera, could we go back to the beginning, and if you could, give us a little bit of a short course about how you and Mr. Hanna first got together and how the cartoon began to evolve from being just that thing that you saw between the features on Saturday to becoming very much a part of our lives?
Well, the way it started with Bill and I was brought out from New York, and Bill was out here, and MGM was starting a cartoon studio, and it was a real nightmare for 2 years, and as the studio was about to close, Bill and I decided to do a cartoon ourselves. So we picked a cat and a mouse, and of course we got about 400 barbs and arrows and slings saying that's the dumbest move anyone ever did. A cat and mouse? That's been done. Forget it. So we were told that you couldn't do more than one or two of them. So we went on to do 20 years of Tom and Jerry, and the series won 7 Oscars. The reason for its longevity and why it's continuing as of today is, I believe, is the stories and the material and the way we handle it.
I think, too, just as you would have in a motion picture, in order to have a familiar kind of set of characters exist for a long time, you have to like them. And I think that's part and parcel, that those characters are very endearing. They're impish, and I think there's a little bit of them in all of us.
Yeah, may I stay on that for a second?
Yes, sir.
When we would take a cartoon out, go to a theater over in Glendale or Santa Barbara, and sneak it into a theater, and the audience didn't know it was coming, when the title came on and it said Tom and Jerry, the roar that would go up from the audience was one of the most heartwarming sounds I ever heard in my life, and they loved the characters.
Also, I'm not saying you were on the ground floor, but that kind of feedback you were getting from people must have been very rewarding, because that was during a time when people were not saturated with cartoons as we are today.
That's right. Well, of course, everybody missed them when they took them out of the theaters, because that was a nice break in the middle of, even today, believe me, put one of our Tom and Jerry cartoons in the middle of mayhem, cars blowing up, Uzi guns going off, giant explosions of whole cities, and it would be a welcome relief. So I used to really develop a lot of the material, and I used to draw it. We never typed a script for Tom and Jerry. It was a drawn script. And we never used, for instance, say you were at war, which we were, and we did a lot of Hirohito gags or Japanese gags or Hitler gags. Those cartoons would be dated today, and we could never run them.
I don't mean to be critical of what was happening over at Warner Brothers. I guess they called it Termite Terrace over there. But so much of the material that did come out of that studio isn't funny to kids today because they don't, for example, know what a ration coupon is.
Well, that's true. They even got into rationing stamps and things like that, you know, that really don't mean anything to kids today. Well, the way I interpret it, I call it slapstick. And we did a lot of it with Tom and Jerry, and we got some of the biggest laughs that I've ever heard in my life in a theater from these kind of gags. But they weren't blood and guts spilled around. They were funny gags and never hurt a character, because the character just bounced right back.
Also, they weren't vicious.
No,
I think maybe that's the bottom line there.
If you remember Tom and Jerry, there were many times where Tom would be chasing Jerry, and Jerry would be trying to mind his own business and get a little piece of cheese or something, and Tom would be after him. Then the third character would come in to threaten both of them. At that point, they would both get together and eliminate the menace. And then they would start their chase again. But there were many times that they worked together, which meant that we weren't a one-note situation there. We had people that loved him for that.
Mr. Barbera, I don't mean to carry this to the absurd, but you speak of these characters in a very real sense. I take it, in having created something like that, in many ways they're your children.
Oh, yeah. Oh, are they? And I tell you, more people ask me to make sketches of Tom and Jerry, and I would make them, and then I get requests from their friends, could I have one? And I always make them smiling and having fun. And no one, I never make them bopping each other for any reason at all. They're friendly, and they love each other, and they look at each other, but they still are a cat and a mouse. And that's the reason we picked them, because once you see them, you know there's going to be chase. And people love chase. Believe me, they love it more than standing around talking and having dialogue.
There are two sides, of course, to a cartoon, the visual and the audio.
Right.
Working with people such as Dawes Butler, who did so many voices, what was that creative process like, trying to make sure that when the cartoon character speaks, it is what the audience expects, it matches?
Well, I tell you, we would interview and test from 30 to 40 different people for voices, sometimes more than that. The secret of a voice, a successful voice, is that if you hear it, if you sit in a projection room and we're testing voices, and you have your eyes closed and you hear a voice and it makes you smile, you're halfway home to picking that character and his voice, because it's warm or it's friendly or it's funny. And the way I used to do it, I would take the same dialogue and assign it to 5 different voice talents. I would then put those tracks on playback, and I would play them, and I would never give it any identification. And the one that got the biggest reaction would be the one we would pick. And you have to be very careful. If you don't pick, like, I recorded I directed the Flintstones. I directed the first 5 of them, picked the voices, and after 5 of them, I just knew we weren't doing the right thing. So we junked them and went back and recast it, and that's when we put in Mel Blanc and
Alan Reed?
Alan Reed, who was wonderful, and those 2 voices just made magic and made music right away.
I remember interviewing Mel Blanc shortly before he died, and he was saying, of course, it was during that time he had his terrible accident, but saying how supportive the cast was and what a joy Alan Reed was to work with.
Oh, I tell you, because I was sitting at this friend's home when they interrupted the broadcasting to announce that Mel had been hurt in a terrible accident right out across the street from UCLA. And what evolved from that was that we would bring the entire crew and equipment up to his home, and he'd be in a body cast from head to feet, and we'd hang the mic over him, and we'd all sit around the bed, and we would record the show. That was really something to see. I wish I had taped it. It would have been marvelous.
Hey, Kazoo, you got a couple of hundred on you?
The other thing, of course, is the coordination of the music and the marvelous sound effects you guys came up with. They're just phenomenal.
Well, the coordination, first of all, you pick a musician that understands what you're doing and understands the cartoon medium and has to complement what you did. You also then have a sound effect man who has to pick the right sound effects and don't repeat the sound effects, so every cartoon in the industry is using the same effect. And when you can marry all of these things together, you have the right project. But it takes somebody on top of the whole thing to make the decisions. Fortunately, that's where I come in, and most of it, because I did all the directing, and I would have to tell them what to do with their voices, or way to lower it, and in doing so, of course, I would be imitating the voices, and quite often they would say, why don't you do the voices? I never made that mistake of getting out there, because we have the best voice people in the world.
So look, I don't wish to stay here forever, and since I am supposed to serve you, I will try. But take heed. Don't ask for more than you can handle. You may get it. Well, see you tomorrow. Maybe.
Let me tell you, Dawes Butler would come in and do sometimes 8 and 9 voices in one cartoon.
I know. I guess those of us in broadcasting are probably able to hear and recognize that, but it's just a joy to see the nuance and the flexibility of a person who can do a lot of voices.
He was wonderful. Well, the way we would cast a character, I said, well, we've got Huckleberry Hound here, and, I'd like to get a Southern voice. Well, I no sooner said that than I would have 7 different versions of Southern voices. Like, for instance, now, if you take North Carolina, that kind of voice kind of comes across like this. But if you take Southern California, kind of slow it down a little bit, and you talk like that. But if you want a Florida cracker voice, you go, how about Jiminy? That's what he would give me. Giving me 7 or 8 versions of a Southern voice.
I don't mean to be patronizing here, but from what you've said about your involvement in the production, it's really nice to know that those words Hanna-Barbera were more than just the names of a couple of producers who sat in their office someplace, that you were...
See, what I would do is concentrate on getting the material and recording, and Bill would concentrate on getting the work done in production and give it out to the animators and check the layouts and the timing. And thank goodness, because that system worked.
Let me get into one other quick area, because I know you have to go here.
Yes, sir.
And that is, of course, everyone's strapped for cash and production money and that kind of thing, and we're getting into the age of computers.
Oh, yeah.
What is your gut feeling about the creative use of the computer versus the old, much slower but still more hands-on kind of drawing?
Well, I'm very positive about my feeling about computers. There's a place for computers, but it's not going to replace the hand art and the real animator who puts his heart and soul into a scene and an animation picture, because computers can take a spaceship or an object and move it around and do incredible things with it, but you can't get close to, like, say, a Bambi-type character who's just lost his mother, and you go in close and a tear comes in his eye and he sniffs and he's heartbroken. Computers can't handle that. They just can't do it yet. There's just a place where they can embellish a picture with some very, very bright, brilliant technique. But you got to have the heart and the warmth in it. And you can't have a feeling between Tom and Jerry where there's a love-hate relationship and do it with a computer. It just can't be done. It's got to be done with an artist.
Well, Mr. Barbera, you've certainly done a lot to enhance my childhood and millions of people around the world, and it's nice to know you're still going strong.
You stay with us, because we got some great new things coming up.
Okay.
And I appreciate your time and talking to you.
Well, let's get back to you sometime. Thank you very much.
God bless you. Take care.
Joseph Barbera of Hanna-Barbera, the team that dominated cartoons on television for 30 years. I'm Dennis Daly.